I was standing in the middle of the Lakewood Hall ballroom, surrounded by roses that smelled like expensive promises. The chandeliers shimmered above, champagne fizzed in tall glasses, and the pianist played something too cheerful to be real. I adjusted the corsage on my wrist, pale lilac, my favorite, and smiled politely at people who thought I belonged here. After all, I was Eleanor Blake, 52, a wedding stationery designer known for turning paper into memory. I'd come because the bride's assistant had insisted, "Miss Eleanor, Natalie would be heartbroken if you didn't attend." I believed her. Until the MC raised the microphone and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our beautiful couple, Natalie Reed and the groom, Ethan Blake." The name hit me like a sound I hadn't heard in decades. Ethan. For a moment, the room spun. The clinking glasses, the lights, the smell of sugar and perfume. Ethan Blake was my former stepson, my ex-husband's only child, the boy I once read bedtime stories to while his father was working late. And Natalie? She was my apprentice, the girl I took in when she couldn't afford art school, the one who once called me Mama L. Now she was marrying him. The MC smiled too widely. And look who's here. Mrs. Eleanor Blake, the mother of the groom. Laughter rippled across the room. Ethan turned, his arm around Natalie's waist. He looked straight at me and said softly, almost rehearsed, "Hi, Mom." The flute of champagne slipped from my hand. It shattered on the marble floor with a sound too loud for such a pretty place. Every head turned. For a second, even the music hesitated. Someone tried to laugh it off. "Oops," police say, enters afters, but my knees refused to move. My fingers tingled. I could smell the sharp sting of spilled alcohol mixing with the lilies. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat closed. The only word that echoed inside me was how. How could she? How could they? I forced myself to breathe, to smile, to nod as if this was perfectly fine. The photographer's flash went off. Once, twice. Catching me mid-blink, mouth half open, like a woman who'd just seen her own ghost. "Mrs. Blake," the MC said again, "would you like to join the couple for a photo?" I heard myself answer, calm as ice. "No." I designed the invitations. I stay behind the camera. And then I walked away. Not because I wanted to, but because, if I didn't, my knees would give out. At the entrance, a display table stood glowing under spotlights. Wedding invitation. Cream vellum, silver edge, embossed initials. Ian N. tied with silk ribbon. The same template I had once created for Ethan's father's second marriage. My handwriting, my craft. Except one thing had changed. The bottom corner, where every design bore my signature line, designed by Eleanor Blake, was scraped clean. Erased. My name. Gone. I touched the empty space and felt the indent of what used to be there. Someone had rubbed it off carefully, maybe with solvent, maybe with intent. Either way, they'd done a perfect job. That's when I realized the cruel symmetry of it. I'd come to celebrate a new beginning. Theirs? Without knowing I was attending the funeral of my own trust. "I came to give my blessing," I whispered, and instead, I buried what was left of my faith. I turned back once more. Ethan and Natalie were laughing under a shower of rose petals, camera flashes lighting their faces like applause. He kissed her hand. She looked radiant. And I thought, maybe betrayal isn't loud. Maybe it's just two people smiling in perfect light, while you're the only one holding the broken glass. As I stepped outside, the cool night hit my face, the air tasting of metal and regret. My palms still stung from where the glass had cut me, a thin line of red across my lifeline. I pressed a napkin over it, watched the blood bloom slowly through white fabric. In that small wound, I saw it clearly. They had erased me from the invitation, but not from the story. And that was the moment I knew this wasn't just a wedding. It was a warning. I came to bless a marriage, I thought, but I ended up attending the funeral of my own name. 10 years earlier, my studio was nothing more than a renovated attic above a bakery in downtown Portland. The air always smelled faintly of sugar and hot paper. I worked with my sleeves rolled up, my hair tied in a messy knot, my hands permanently dusted with gold foil and glue. That's when Natalie Reed showed up, a shy art student with paint under her nails and shoes that squeaked when she walked. She said she'd been following my work since high school. "You make paper breathe," she told me, her eyes glinting with that kind of hunger I used to have at 20. I didn't usually take interns, but something about her nervous energy, the way she looked at my old Heidelberg press like it was a sacred relic, softened me. So I said yes. "You'll start from the basics," I told her. "Glue, trimming, folding, all the things people think are unimportant." She nodded quickly, scribbling notes as if every word was a secret. Within weeks, Natalie became the rhythm of my studio. She arrived before me, stayed after me, humming under her breath as she pressed flowers between pages of parchment. Her hands were gentle, precise. She talked to the paper like it could hear her. I used to tell clients, the heart of every invitation lies in the hands that made it. Back then, I believed that was mine. One rainy afternoon, she asked if she could stay temporarily. Her dorm lease had ended, and she couldn't afford rent. I said yes again, without hesitation. She slept on the studio couch, her sketchbook stacked neatly beside the sewing machine. We shared late dinners of instant noodles and cheap wine, laughing about clients who wanted rustic but luxury designs. That winter, Ethan came back from London, his husband's son. He was 25 then. Polite, distant, all pressed shirts and quiet smiles. He needed work experience in design management, so I offered him part-time help at my studio. The first day he walked in, Natalie dropped a tray of ribbons. He knelt to pick them up, their fingers brushed, and the air seemed to change temperature. I saw it. The small spark that pretends to be harmless. I told myself not to interfere. They were adults. I was only their mentor, not their keeper. But sometimes at night, when I came down for water, I'd see the studio lights still on. They'd be laughing over piles of test prints, heads close, faces soft in the glow of the pressed lamp. And though I didn't know it then, that laugh was writing a story that would end with my name erased. Natalie loved the flower press, an antique iron contraption I'd owned for 20 years. Its handle creaked like an old violin when turned. Every card that left my studio passed through it. To me, it wasn't just a machine, it was memory itself. Each petal it pressed carried someone's story, someone's vow. I taught her how to layer the petals, how to time the pressure just right. She once looked at me with genuine wonder and said, "Do you think a card can change someone's life?" "If you write the right name on it," I told her, "it can." She laughed, and the machine groaned softly as if agreeing. I didn't realize she'd remember that line, and one day, twist it. Over time, I began to treat her like the daughter I never had. I helped her design her first portfolio, paid her art school tuition when her financial aid fell through. When my ex-husband sent Ethan's graduation photos, I showed them to her, proud, as if they were family. "He looks kind," she said once. "He is," I answered, smiling. "Just cautious, like his father used to be before he forgot how." I told her stories about the early days of my marriage, the partnership, the creative chaos, the way love fades when money grows. I didn't notice how quietly she listened. Then came the day Ethan stopped by unannounced. He was supposed to discuss a business collaboration for his father's company. I still remember the moment he saw Natalie bent over the press, a strand of hair stuck to her cheek, hand steady on the iron handle. He smiled, that slow, deliberate smile his father used to wear. "You've kept the place alive," he told me. "I had hope," I said, nodding toward Natalie. "Then she must be extraordinary." He said it so easily, and maybe he didn't mean anything then. But I felt something shift, like the air had developed a quiet echo. After that, he visited more often, under the excuse of reviewing designs. I caught them exchanging glances, whispers that stopped when I walked in. I told myself it was harmless, that I was being paranoid. But small things started changing. She began signing drafts with N. Reed Studio instead of E. Blake Atelier. I found she'd registered an Instagram handle for her personal work. When I asked about it, she smiled. "Oh, it's just for fun. I always tag you, don't worry." And she did, at first. A year later, Ethan left to start a job in Seattle. Natalie cried when he said goodbye. I thought it was just affection. He'd always been emotional. Before leaving, Ethan hugged me. "Thank you," he said, "for looking after her. You always take care of everyone." It was meant kindly, but the words left a sting. Because no one ever took care of me. After he left, Natalie stayed for another 2 years. We worked side by side, building the brand, winning clients I'd only dreamed of. She had talent, yes, but I had trust, and I gave it to her freely. She started managing orders, handling accounts. I taught her everything. Suppliers, margins, the delicate timing between passion and profit. When I finally promoted her to co-designer, she hugged me and whispered, "You'll never regret this, I promise." I remember thinking, no one who says that ever keeps it. Still, I believed her. Because that's what you do when you love someone like family. You believe, even when something in you says don't. The day she moved out, I helped her pack. She'd been offered a freelance opportunity downtown. She took the flower press with her, said she'd return it after she found one of her own. I didn't stop her. The studio looked painfully empty without it, like a mouth missing a tooth. A week later, she sent a message. Q. Eleanor. Conscombao, gi ki, king ki. I'll make you proud. And she did. For a while. Until the day I saw her first business card. Reed Paper Studio. Same logo, same typography, same tagline I'd written years before. Turning paper into memory. Only my name was gone. I stared at it numb, trying to convince myself it was coincidence. That maybe it was her way of honoring me. But deep down, I knew. She hadn't forgotten. She'd simply replaced. Looking back now, I realized the betrayal didn't start at that wedding. It began the moment I said yes too many times. When I gave her my couch, my tools, my craft, and never once thought to give her limits. People say betrayal feels like a knife. To me, it felt like paper. Soft at first, then slicing clean through without warning. The flower press still sits in her photos online. The same scratches, the same groove I once carved on the handle. Like healing, patience creates beauty. Every time I see it, I remember the night she asked that question. Do you think a card can change someone's life? And I, foolishly proud, answered, if you write the right name, it can. I just never imagined that name wouldn't be mine. 2 months before the wedding, the studio was quiet except for the rhythmic hum of the paper cutter. Rain pressed against the windows, that soft, steady Portland kind that smelled of metal and dust. I was sorting through sample envelopes when I heard the familiar creak of the front door. "Coo, Eleanor," she called softly, like she used to when she lived here. Her voice hadn't changed, but something in its brightness felt practiced. She stepped in wearing a beige trench coat, her hair smooth, makeup subtle but expensive. The girl who once saved for secondhand brushes now carried a designer tote. "Long time no see," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. "I thought you'd forgotten where this place was." She laughed, the same airy laugh that once filled my evenings, and looked around the studio. How could I forget? Everything still smells like glue and lavender. I smiled politely, though the scent of lavender suddenly felt too strong, like it was covering something. Then she said it. "Isi. If I were to have wedding invitations made, would you take the job?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes watched my reaction too closely. "Of course," I said. "Why wouldn't I? Who's the lucky man?" She hesitated, pressing her thumb against the seam of her bag. "Someone special," she said finally. "You'll be surprised." I laughed, too quickly. "You always liked surprises." She smiled, and for a heartbeat, I saw the girl I used to know. Shy, grateful, eager to please. But then her phone buzzed, and that expression vanished. She glanced at the screen, her mouth tightening slightly before she flipped it face down. "You're glowing," I teased. "Whoever he is, he's making you happy." "He makes me feel seen," she said, and her voice softened. "Not just as someone's student." The sentence stung more than I wanted it to. She pulled out a small envelope from her bag. Inside was a pressed sprig of baby's breath, one of my signature touches. "I kept this from my first project." she said. Still remember how you taught me to press it? I took it, smiled, and placed it on the work table beside the cutter. Then whoever you're marrying is lucky, I said. I'll make your invitations myself. Thank you, Mrs., she whispered, and I thought I saw guilt flicker in her eyes, but it disappeared before I could name it. We talked about paper stalks and ribbon shades. She chose ivory with silver foil. Elegant, understated, my favorite combination. When I asked for the couple's names, she laughed again. Not yet, she said. Let me bring the full design brief later. I want it to be a surprise reveal. I nodded, half amused, half curious. Natalie always loved drama in her designs. I assumed this was another one of her theatrical ideas. Before leaving, she paused at the door. You still have the flower press? Of course, I said. Where else would it be? Wood, she murmured. It belongs here. Then she smiled, almost tenderly, and walked out into the rain. Her perfume lingered long after. Not the soft lavender I used to buy her, but something sharper, foreign, like burnt sugar. That night, I opened my ledger and penciled in. Wedding. Client, Natalie R. Date, TBD. A small note beside it, special surprise. Confirm names. It seemed harmless. But the next morning, when I went to open the studio, I found the pressed sprig of baby's breath still on the table, flattened beneath a paper cutter blade. Its stem had snapped clean in half. I stood there for a long time, staring at that broken flower, trying to brush off the chill running down my arms. Coincidence, I told myself. Just bad luck. Still, a strange thought lingered. What kind of surprise needs someone's name hidden until the very end? The ballroom glittered like a jewelry box, every light too bright, every smile too polished. People moved around me in elegant blurs, champagne bubbling in tall glasses, the string quartet playing something sweet and cruel. I had told myself I was ready for anything. I wasn't. Right in the center of the lobby stood a glass pedestal. On it, under perfect lighting, was the wedding invitation. The same design I had taught Natalie years ago, down to the embossed silver border and the pressed sprig of baby's breath. My breath caught. It was mine. Every curve of the typography. Every cut of the edge. Every imperfectly perfect fold. Except for one thing. At the bottom right corner, where my signature line used to be, designed by Eleanor Blake. There was now a neat new print, Natalie Creations. 2 words. That was all it took to erase 20 years of my craft. I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingers trembled as I reached out, touching the glass. It was smooth, cold, as if the design inside wasn't paper anymore but a tombstone. Beautiful, isn't it? Ola, a woman beside me said. I heard she designed it herself. Such talent for her age. I smiled stiffly. Yes, I whispered. She learns fast. Inside the hall, everything sparkled in champagne tones. The couple stood under an arch of white roses. Natalie radiant in lace, Ethan in a crisp tuxedo. They looked like a magazine cover. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. That maybe she'd been inspired, not deceitful. Then the MC's voice rang out. And now, before the first dance, let's invite the groom's mother, Mrs. Zhao, Eleanor Blake, to say a few words. A round of polite applause. The sound hit me like a wave. I froze. Someone touched my elbow. He must be so proud. Proud. Of what? I rose slowly, my heels sinking into the plush carpet like anchors. Each step toward the stage felt heavier, the air thicker. I heard my pulse louder than the music. Ethan smiled as I approached. Calm. Controlled. The same smile his father used to wear when lying. Natalie looked away, her fingers clutching her bouquet too tightly. Mrs. Blake, the MC said again, handing me the microphone, please share your blessings with the couple. I took it. My hand shook slightly. For a second, I almost did what everyone expected. Say something polite, gracious, forgettable. But then, I saw it again. The invitation on the big screen behind them, projected as part of the slideshow. Zoomed in. The words, Natalie Creations, shining where my name used to be. And I felt something inside me break. quietly, cleanly, like a page being torn from a book. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm but hollow. When I first met Natalie, she was a student who believed that every card carries a soul. A few people nodded, smiling vaguely. She once asked me if a design could change someone's life. And I told her, if you write the right name, it can. I paused. Natalie's head lifted slightly. Ethan's smile froze. "Tonight," I continued, "I see that I was right. A name really can change a life, especially when you take someone else's." A ripple of uneasy laughter. Someone whispered. I looked at Natalie. Her face went pale beneath the makeup. "Congratulations," I said softly. "You've designed something unforgettable." I handed the microphone back to the MC before he could stop me. My hands were ice. The music started again, awkwardly, trying to patch over the silence. But the silence had weight, thick, metallic, unmovable. I turned to leave. As I walked down the aisle, people avoided my eyes. Someone whispered my name, someone else muttered. That was dramatic. Maybe it was. But betrayal rarely ends in quiet applause. Outside, the night air hit me like glass. I stood under the hotel awning, watching the rain smear the city lights. Through the window, I could still see them dancing. Her veil spinning, his hand on her back, the crowd clapping. A perfect performance. I tried to steady my breath. My reflection stared back from the glass. Older, smaller, blurred by raindrops. For the first time, I realized I looked like a ghost at my own funeral. "Miss Eleanor." I turned. Natalie was behind me, breathless, bouquet still in hand. The rain had darkened her lashes. "Please, don't leave like that," she said. "I didn't mean." "Didn't mean what?" I asked quietly. "To erase me? Or to pretend you made what I taught you?" She swallowed, eyes flicking toward the hall. "You don't understand. Ethan thought it would look more professional if..." "If what?" I cut in. "If I didn't exist?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. "You could have told me," I said. "I could have helped. You didn't have to steal to belong." Her mascara began to bleed in the rain. "If it wasn't like that, then tell me what it was." She didn't, just stood there, trembling, the bouquet slipping from her hand. The flowers hit the pavement, pale petals scattering over my shoes. I stepped back. "Go back inside," I said. "The show isn't over." Then I turned and walked into the rain. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my work table, the invitation I'd taken from the venue lying under the lamp. The silver edges glowed faintly, beautiful and cruel. I picked up a pen, ran it over the blank corner where my name used to be. It wasn't anger I felt, it was absence. The hollow kind that hums quietly, like a missing heartbeat. I opened my journal and wrote one line. They took my name off the paper, but they can't take the ink from my hands. Then I placed the invitation under the flower press, turned the handle once, and listened to the metal creak. A sound that had always meant creation. That night, it sounded like goodbye. I didn't remember the drive home. The city blurred past the windshield. Red lights bleeding into rain, headlights smearing across glass. By the time I parked in front of my townhouse, the champagne buzz had vanished, replaced by a steady hum behind my ribs. Inside, the studio was dark. I didn't turn on the main light, only the small lamp above the work table. Its glow fell over the wall where I kept 20 years of samples. Wedding invitations, anniversary cards, birth announcements. Hundreds of lives I'd helped celebrate. They looked different now. Not joyful, not proud. Just proof. Proof that I had spent 2 decades decorating other people's happiness while forgetting to write my own. Hing frame down. Then another. Then all of them. The pins clattered on the floor like small metallic raindrops. For a long moment I just stood there staring at the blank wall. It felt honest. Empty, but mine. I whispered, "If someone erases your name from a piece of paper, do you still exist?" The question hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. I sat down at the desk and opened my laptop. My inbox blinked with unpaid invoices, pending collaborations. Most of them joint projects with Natalie's studio. For years we'd shared clients, reputation, even templates. She'd become my public face without me noticing. The cursor blinked. I scrolled to her contact, Natalie Creations Partnership. Then I hovered over the delete key. It was such a small action. One click. But when I pressed it, it felt like snapping a chain. I drafted a single email. Subject: termination of collaboration. Body: I will no longer design for those who forget to say thank you. Lenore, no explanations. No apologies. I hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving felt louder than the thunder outside. Next, I reached for the invitation I'd brought home from the wedding, the one displayed in the glass pedestal. Its edges caught the lamplight, perfect and cruel. I turned it in my hands, tracing the erased corner where my name used to be. On impulse, I lit a candle. The small flame flickered, fragile and alive. I held the invitation above it. Not close enough to burn, just enough to feel the warmth tremble through the paper. The silver foil shimmered, then darkened. Smoke curled upward, soft and gray, coiling like a question. When the corner finally caught, the flame licked its way through the word, forever. The heat kissed my fingers. I dropped it into the metal tray. It smoldered there, curling inward until only the words, love, and a blackened edge remained. For the first time that night, I felt something close to peace. I wasn't destroying my work. I was reclaiming it. I went to the cabinet, pulled out the old flower press, the one I'd taught Natalie to use. Its wooden handle was cracked now, its screws rusted. I hadn't touched it in years. I wiped the dust away, placed a single blank card inside, and pressed down slowly. The hinge groaned, just like it always had. That sound, heavy, human, imperfect, reminded me I was still here. I whispered to the machine, the way I used to when I worked late into the night. We're not done yet. The press held the paper tight, and I imagined it breathing beneath the weight, reshaping itself, waiting for something new to be written. At some point, dawn began to seep through the blinds. The rain had stopped. I sat with a mug of cold coffee and watched light creep across the mess. The fallen frames, the scattered pins, the faint curl of smoke still rising from the tray. It looked like aftermath, but it also looked like beginning. I realized that I didn't need my name printed on a piece of cardstock to exist. My hands still remembered every motion, the fold, the cut, the press. My craft lived in muscle and memory, not in credit lines. I took one of the blank cards from the stack and wrote, slowly, deliberately, with my old fountain pen, Eleanor Blake, handmade by survival. Then I placed it under the flower press, next to the burned invitation. Two sides of the same story, one destroyed, one reborn. When the morning light finally filled the room, I looked at the wall again. There, unadorned, waiting, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to cover it. I just whispered, maybe starting over isn't erasing. Maybe it's rewriting. Outside, the first bus rumbled down the street, carrying people to their neat, predictable lives. Mine, for once, didn't feel predictable at all. The smell of smoke lingered faintly in the air, mixed with lavender. Sharp, real, alive. I exhaled and let it fill my lungs. Then I turned off the lamp and said to the empty room, goodbye, forever love. The morning after I sent that email, my phone buzzed with a message from Natalie. Natalie, I just want to make my own brand. Don't get me wrong. Me, it's fine. Just know, from now on, I don't belong on your thank you page anymore. I stared at the screen for a while before locking it. No anger, no tears. Just the kind of silence that hums like static. For the rest of that week, I buried myself in routine. I reopened my old Etsy shop, cleaned the studio, rearranged my pens by color. Small, practical things that made me feel like order still existed somewhere. But silence doesn't stay quiet for long. The first rumor came from a florist I'd worked with for years. Eleanor, are you okay? She asked on the phone, her voice cautious. Someone said you've been struggling with memory? Forgetting orders? I laughed, too loudly. My memory's fine, my patience isn't. Then another message arrived from a mutual client. Heard things got messy with your protege. So sorry. Hope you're getting help. Getting help. The phrase landed like a slap. By Friday, I stopped answering calls. The phone kept lighting up anyway. Gossip travels faster than mail, especially when it's packaged as concern. On Saturday morning, I went to the market. Usually, the vendors waved, offered me fresh tulips for my designs. That day, a few just nodded politely, eyes sliding past me as if I were an acquaintance from a dream. "She used to be brilliant," I overheard someone whisper. "Poor thing, can't let go of the past." I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, my paper bag of lemons crinkling louder than their voices. At home, I placed the lemons in a bowl. Bright, cold, sour. They looked perfect, untouched, the way people like their stories about others. Simple, complete, easy to swallow. 2 days later, a delivery arrived, a box wrapped in gold tissue paper. No return address. Inside, a small wooden frame with a quote engraved, "A good teacher creates successors." No note, no signature, just that. I stared at it for a long time, pulse tightening in my throat. The irony was so neat, it almost made me laugh. I set the frame face down on the counter. I didn't need reminders. By midweek, even my inbox felt foreign. Emails came in with subject lines like, "Clarification request," or "Heard the news." I knew better than to click. I opened the curtains instead. Outside, the sky was a washed-out gray, the kind that makes everything look like an old photograph. Across the street, a group of art students were sketching the buildings, laughing, carefree. One of them had Natalie's same messy bun, her same impatient energy. For a second, the sight hurt more than the rumors. I sat at my work table, picked up a blank card, and started folding. Fold, press, trim, repeat. The rhythm steadied me. Paper doesn't lie. It remembers pressure, every crease, every mistake. Unlike people, it doesn't pretend smoothness is truth. That evening, Ethan called. The number flashed on my screen. I hadn't saved it, but I knew it. I let it ring out the first time. The second time, I answered. "Eleanor." His voice was careful, rehearsed. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "About what?" "You and Natalie. She's worried you're upset." "Tell her not to worry," I said. "I'm not upset. I'm awake." He sighed. "Look, we just want peace. Maybe it's better if you step back a little. Focus on yourself." I almost smiled. Didn't really disappear? Silence. Then, softly, "You know that's not what I said." "No," I replied, "but it's what you meant." I hung up before he could answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels watched. Outside, wind scraped against the windows like someone whispering through glass. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing that isolation has a sound. Low, steady, like a heartbeat you can't turn off. By dawn, I'd made a decision. If they wanted me invisible, I would stay silent, but not gone. Silence, after all, can be strategy. I brewed coffee, sat at my desk, and opened a new sketchpad. On the first page, I wrote one line in thick black ink, "Let them talk, paper listens." Then I drew, not invitations, not flowers, not names, just shapes of light breaking through cracks. Outside, the first gust of wind knocked over the bowl of lemons, scattering them across the floor. I watched them roll, bright, round, unstoppable. Some storms, I thought, don't arrive with thunder. They start with whispers. And this one was already gathering. A week later, they came to my studio. No message, no call. Just the sound of the bell above the door cutting through the quiet. When I looked up, they were standing there. Natalie in a tailored beige coat. Ethan beside her in that same quiet arrogance his father once wore like a second skin. The air shifted, heavy with perfume and tension. It smelled faintly of smoke, the ghost of the invitation I'd burned days earlier. "You should have called first," I said. "We didn't think you'd mind," Natalie replied, her smile tight. "This place used to be home." "Used to be," I echoed. Ethan looked around the room, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the empty walls where my framed designs had hung. "You've changed things," he said. "Aining up," I answered, making room for honesty. He chuckled. Still dramatic. I didn't bite. I waited. Finally, he stepped closer. "Eleanor, You should be proud of us. We're continuing your legacy. I met his gaze. Continuing or consuming? Blinked, almost amused. That's unfair. So is theft, I said quietly. Natalie flinched. MISSI, it's not theft. My brand is growing, that's all. I just changed the name for clarity. And you changed the person behind it too? I interrupted. She swallowed hard. I never wanted this to be ugly. Then maybe you shouldn't have printed it in gold foil, I said. Her mouth opened, closed. Ethan sighed, clearly irritated. You're making this bigger than it is. Taught her everything. Isn't that what good teachers do? Let their students surpass them? Surpass, yes, I said. Replace, no. Silence. The only sound was the ticking of the clock. Sharp, deliberate, like a metronome marking the space between betrayal and confession. Natalie took a step forward, her tone softening. Kuai, please don't ruin what we're building. People respect you. If you keep quiet, everyone wins. Everyone? I asked. Or just you? She looked down. Her voice turned almost pleading. I worked hard, Ko-yu. I didn't steal your clients. They came because of what I learned from you. Then why erase the proof? No answer. The silence stretched until Ethan broke it with that same smooth, low voice I used to mistake for kindness. Eleanor, he said, you're hurting yourself clinging to this. We're family. We didn't mean to offend you. Family, I repeated. Funny word. You use it like a shield. Do you know what family means to me, Ethan? He shrugged slightly. It means I raised you when your father was too busy sleeping with his secretary. It means I packed your lunch, paid your tuition, and pretended not to notice when you called me stepmother like it was an insult. And now, 20 years later, you bring your bride here to remind me I'm just a footnote? His jaw tightened. Don't twist this. No, I said softly. I'm just reading the fine print you wrote. Natalie looked desperate now. Clucci, please stop. You didn't come to fight. You came to make peace. Peace built on silence isn't peace, I replied. It's burial. She blinked fast, eyes glistening. You've changed. You used to believe in kindness. Kindness doesn't mean letting people carve their names over yours, I said. For a moment, no one spoke. The scent of burnt paper seemed to thicken, or maybe it was just my imagination. The ghost of my old designs smoldering in the air. Then Ethan said it, the one thing that cut deeper than all the rest. I just don't want people thinking you were ever married to my father. It's embarrassing. The world stopped. Even the clock seemed to pause mid-tick. My throat closed. My fingers went numb. Embarrassing? I repeated. To whom? To us, he said simply. Your name? It complicates things. Clients Google everything. It's cleaner this way. Cleaner? I said, my voice a whisper. Like erasing fingerprints from a crime scene. Natalie reached for his arm. Ethan, stop. But I raised my hand. No, let him. I want to hear what else my existence ruins for him. He looked at me then. Not angry, not cruel, just indifferent. That was worse. You're talented, Eleanor, he said. But you're part of an old chapter. We're just moving forward. There it was. The polite obituary of a life's work. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. My palms were slick against the table edge. You think I'm the past, I said slowly. But everything you touch, every pattern, every technique, every client who believes in your brands, it's all inked with me. You can scrub the name, Ethan, but not the fingerprints. His mouth tightened. You can't claim ownership of art, he said. It evolves. Art evolves, I said. But decency shouldn't. Natalie's voice cracked. Ku-chu. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to be someone. You already were, I said quietly. You just didn't like whose reflection you came from. She covered her face with her hands. Ethan exhaled sharply, impatient. Let's go, he muttered. This is pointless. They turned toward the door. But before they could leave, I said the one truth I hadn't yet voiced. You know, Ethan, your father once told me I was lucky to marry into your name. I spent years proving I didn't need it. And now you've proven he was right. It's a name that stains anything it touches. He froze, shoulders stiff. Goodbye, I said. And take your borrowed genius with you. Natalie hesitated at the doorway. She whispered. Go, I said. You've already taken everything you came for. They left. The door swung shut with a soft chime, the kind that used to sound welcoming. Now it echoed like a verdict. I stood alone in the quiet aftermath, the air thick and stale. The clock resumed ticking, steady and cruel. I realized I was trembling, not from fear, but release. I looked around the studio, half-finished cards on the table, ribbons curled in jars, the faint scorch mark on the tray from the burned invitation. So much of my life had been made of delicate things. Paper, glue, foil, patience. And yet, none of it had ever felt as fragile as this moment. I picked up a calligraphy pen and dipped it into ink. The liquid spread, dark and heavy, across the page. I wrote slowly, the words bleeding slightly at the edges. Some wounds don't bleed. They just change color into ink. The sentence glistened under the light. A confession. A promise. I set it aside to dry, took a long breath, and whispered to the empty room. So be it. Outside, a wind rose, sharp, sudden, rattling the windows. The studio smelled faintly of smoke again, though nothing burned. Not yet. 3 days after that confrontation, my name appeared on her website, but not where it belonged. Trained under Eleanor Blake, former logistics coordinator at Blake Atelier. Former logistics coordinator. The title hung there like a small, deliberate insult. Not founder, not designer, just someone who once fetched supplies and organized files. A neat little rewrite of history. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I refreshed the page, as if they might fix themselves. They didn't. Within 24 hours, Natalie's PR post had been shared dozens of times. The caption read, "From apprentice to entrepreneur, the story of a young woman who rebuilt a legacy." Legacy. Mine, apparently, was now her stepping stone. Oh! The comments were worse. So inspiring. Love how she overcame difficult mentors. Some people can't accept the next generation. I scrolled until my eyes hurt, until my own name looked foreign. By the end of the week, 3 long-term clients canceled their orders. One wrote apologetically, "Natalie's studio offers faster delivery and, well, she said you're scaling back." Scaling back. That's what you call it when someone pushes you out of your own business. My accountant sent me a message that began with, "We may need to discuss downsizing." I didn't open the attachment. Rumors travel like perfume, sweet first, then suffocating. A neighbor stopped me at the grocery store. "Eleanor, I heard you've retired." How wonderful, finally resting. Retired. Apparently, I had vanished gracefully. At the post office, another familiar face whispered, "Are you okay, dear?" People online say you've been confused lately. Confused. So now I was not only irrelevant, but unstable. I went home and sat in the dark, the refrigerator humming the only steady sound in the house. Every click of my phone felt like a small betrayal. That night, curiosity beat exhaustion. I opened social media again. Natalie had posted a new photo, her in a white studio, sunlight pouring over her as she held a paper flower. Caption, "To my mentor, who taught me patience. I owe you everything, but we all must grow beyond our teachers." 1,000 hearts, 2,000 shares. Somewhere between flattery and erasure. People love redemption arcs. They never check whose ashes built them. The next morning, a supplier called. "Sorry, Miss Blake. Natalie's team has taken over the bulk order accounts. She said you'd prefer to focus on smaller, private commissions now." "She said that?" "Yes. She showed us an email thread from your domain." I froze. "Send me the screenshot." When it arrived, my stomach twisted. It was from my address. But the tone wasn't mine, the signature slightly off. Someone had cloned my email. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt cold, because this wasn't naive anymore. This was strategic. Over the next few days, small sabotages piled up. clients receiving misprinted samples from me, invoices missing numbers, a letter from the city tax office saying my business registration was under review. Every thread I tried to pull led back to the same place. Natalie Creations. Her empire rising, mine quietly buried under paperwork. I started keeping a notebook. Dates, screenshots, delivery slips. At first, it was just for sanity. Then it became evidence. Still, the silence hurt more than the losses. No one called to ask if it was true. They just assumed. One evening, I walked past her new storefront downtown. White walls, gold lettering, fresh flowers in the window. And there, on display, was the flower press. My flower press, the one she promised to return. It sat like a relic, labeled Vintage Press, symbol of the atelier's humble beginnings. Humble. How poetic. Through the glass, I saw her talking to customers, glowing, radiant. Ethan stood beside her, hand on her back, his smile perfectly rehearsed. I watched them laugh, two actors taking their bow while I stood outside the theater, unseen. I didn't knock. I just looked at the reflection of my own face in the glass, pale, older, framed by city lights, and thought, so this is what vanishing looks like. That night, I couldn't eat. The studio felt smaller than ever. I sat by the window, scrolling through years of photos. Natalie holding her first finished card, Ethan helping hang our first sign. Each image now felt like a forgery. At some point, I opened a blank document. I wrote, "They rewrote the story. I will rewrite it back." Then I closed the laptop. Days bled into one another. I started waking at 4 a.m., unable to go back to sleep. A coffee replaced meals. The phone buzzed, always bad news. A friend, Amelia, the lawyer who once helped register my brand, called one night. I saw the articles. Are you going to let them do this? What's left to take? I asked. Your name, she said. And that's enough. Her words lingered. My name. That small, stubborn thing still attached to me. 2 weeks later, an online magazine ran a feature, Eurosat, from apprentice to icon, Natalie Reed. The woman who modernized, handcrafted invitations. The subheading quoted her, "I learned patience and discipline from my early days as a studio assistant." Studio assistant. That was me. I laughed out loud, the sound brittle and sharp. The journalist had used one of my old photos. The studio shelves, my handwriting visible on the labels, cropped just above my shoulder. Even my presence had been edited out neatly. That night, I tore the article out of the printed magazine and pinned it above my desk. Not out of masochism, but memory. A reminder, they'd already started the war. And I wasn't going to keep pretending it was just gossip. I began saving everything. Screenshots of posts, falsified invoices, cached pages before edits. I stored them in a folder named Seeds. Because that's what truth is. A seed. A seed. It might sleep in the dark, but given the right moment, it grows. Oh, part of me ached. The part that once loved her. I replayed our last conversation. The way her eyes filled when she said, "I just wanted to be someone." And I realized she still was that girl. Only now she'd mistaken theft for transformation. I could forgive the ambition, but not the lie. On the first Monday of the new month, another envelope arrived. Official stationery, embossed seal. It cease and desist letter from her lawyers. They claimed my new Etsy relaunch violated the intellectual property of Natalie Creations, my own templates, my own floral patterns. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. Then I laughed again. Short, cracked, incredulous. She wasn't content with rewriting history. Now she wanted to copyright it. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey. The expensive kind I'd been saving for a client celebration that would never happen. The liquid burned down my throat, warm and bitter. I took the cease and desist, laid it flat on the table, and pressed my hand against the paper. I could almost feel the heat of the fire building again. The same quiet defiance that had made me burn the invitation. Not yet, I told myself. Fire comes later. Outside, the street light flickered. Inside, the flower press creaked faintly in the dark, like it remembered something I didn't. I whispered to it, the way I once whispered to Natalie when she doubted herself. They think they've buried me. But I was the one who taught them how to plant. It happened by accident, the way truth often does. That morning, I was sorting through invoices piled on my desk when I found an envelope slipped between two catalogs. No return address, no note. Inside, a printed contract, one I wasn't supposed to see. I read the first line and felt my pulse slow. Natalie. Creations. X Silverline Printing Co. The agreement outlined a bulk order for embossed wedding stationery, my designs, my layout, my logo. At the bottom of the document, where my registered mark should have been, was a perfect imitation. Same swirl, same serif. Except the copyright symbol beside it now read, Natalie Creations 2025. For a long time, I didn't move. The paper in my hands felt heavier than it should. So this was it. Not coincidence, not gossip, not pettiness. It was theft, written in legal ink. But for the first time, I didn't cry. No trembling, no outrage. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes right before a storm changes direction. I took a photo of every page, scanned the watermark, the timestamps, the notary stamp at the bottom. Every detail. A nail for the coffin they built with my name. When I finished, I placed the contract flat on the table and whispered, "Got you." Then I reached for my phone and called Amelia Quinn. My old friend, the lawyer who had once helped register my brand years ago, back when I still believed in permanence. She picked up on the second ring. "Elle, it's been a while." "I know," I said. "Do you still want that custom wedding invitation?" She laughed softly. "You're joking, right?" "No," I said. "I have a design. Perfect for filing lawsuits." There was a pause. The sound of her shifting in her chair, her voice dropping an octave. "Knee everything." We met that afternoon at her office downtown. Glass walls, metal shelves, the faint scent of coffee and printer ink. I laid the contract on her desk like a piece of evidence from a crime scene. Amelia adjusted her glasses, scanned the pages, then looked up at me. "You still have the original trademark certificate?" "Framed, hanging in my studio." "Keep it there. It's not art anymore. It's ammunition." She flipped to the last page and exhaled. "They didn't even bother to redesign the logo. They copied it pixel for pixel." "Bold, isn't it?" I said. Reckless," she corrected. "And actionable." Her voice was calm, almost clinical. But beneath it, I could hear the faint spark of satisfaction. "You want me to send a cease and desist?" she asked. "No," I said. "Want you to wait." She raised an eyebrow. "Wait for what? For them to think I'm still asleep." Amelia smiled slowly. "You always did like your revenge handmade." On the way home, I felt lighter than I had in months. The city lights blurred past, but this time, they didn't look cruel. They looked deliberate. Each one, a reminder that darkness only highlights the glow. Back in the studio, I pinned the printed contract on my wall beside the magazine article that had rewritten my history. 2 lies, side by side, neat, professional, traceable. Then I took a fresh sheet of vellum and began sketching. Not a wedding card, a manifesto, one aspime. A pressed white flower at the center, veins visible, fragile but impossible to erase. Underneath, I wrote in small cursive, "Original doesn't mean first. It means true." It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was precision. At midnight, the rain began. The studio smelled of glue and smoke and something else. Determination. I made tea, opened my notebook marked seeds, and added a new entry. Form, March 18. Discovery, contract proof of trademark violation. Action, file under harvest. I closed the book and smiled. Before going to bed, I checked my phone. Another post from Natalie glowed on the screen. Her new campaign, announcing a collaboration with Silverline Printing. The photo showed her holding a sample card. My logo blurred just enough to seem untraceable. The caption read, Growth means outgrowing your beginnings. I stared at it for a long moment, then hit save screenshot. Yes, I murmured. And sometimes, beginnings grow teeth. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. Dreamless. Not peaceful exactly, but purposeful. Because now, I had proof. And proof, unlike love, doesn't fade. The next morning, I woke before dawn. For once, not from panic, but clarity. The decision had already formed overnight, clean and cold like cut glass. If they had stolen my name, I would make a new one. Not as their victim, but as their origin. So that morning, with coffee in one hand and Amelia's documents spread across the table, I opened the government trademark portal and typed Blake Originals. The cursor blinked, waiting for me to confirm. I hesitated for half a breath, then hit submit. A simple act. A few keystrokes, but it felt like taking my name back from the grave. When the confirmation email arrived minutes later, I whispered, "Welcome back, Eleanor." For the next few weeks, I vanished from social media, from clients, from the noise. Let them think I was broken. People underestimate what's quiet. They confuse silence with defeat. I used that silence to build. To plan was simple, not an argument. A revelation. Amelia helped secure a venue, the Portland Museum of Design, a modest hall that had once hosted student exhibits. I called the event 20 Years of Paper. The art and memory of the handcrafted. It wasn't just an exhibition. It was a mirror, and I intended to make them look. For weeks, I lived like a ghost surrounded by glue, foil, and stacks of old designs. I reopened every drawer, dusted every prototype. The ones Natalie and I made side by side, the early ones from before she knew how to hold a bone folder properly. Some nights, I caught myself smiling at the memory. Others, I caught myself shaking. I catalogued everything chronologically. From my first invitation design in 2005, hand-pressed gold initials on cotton paper, to the burned wedding card from Ethan and Natalie's ceremony. I placed the charred edge one inside a glass frame, leaving it half burnt, half pristine. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Even fire remembers where it began." It would be the centerpiece. By day, I worked on the invitations for the exhibit. Blake Originals printed in subtle silver. By night, I rehearsed my speech. At first, it felt awkward, like talking to an empty room, like from another and trees. Hispers pair. I would stand in front of the mirror, the burned invitation in my hand, and speak until my reflection looked like someone who believed herself again. "They can erase my name," I said to the mirror, voice low and steady. "But they can't erase the fingerprints I left on the paper." Each repetition smoothed the fear, sharpened the resolve. 2 weeks before the event, Amelia stopped by with a stack of printed press releases. She leaned against the table, scanning the exhibit layout. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. "No," I said. "That's how I know it's worth doing." She smiled. "You sound like the woman I met 20 years ago, the one who believed paper could outlast pain." "It can," I said, "if you emboss it deep enough." I spent my evenings crafting the invitations for the launch, hand-stamped, sealed with wax, each one unique. No printers, no assistants, just my hands. I sent them to art critics, designers, journalists, and, of course, to Natalie Creations. Her envelope was addressed in my neatest calligraphy, silver ink on white vellum. No note. Just a single line at the bottom of the card. Every design tells its maker's story, even the stolen ones. I mailed it without hesitation. The night before the event, I couldn't sleep. The studio smelled of smoke and lavender, my past and present entwined. The flower press sat in the corner, cleaned and polished, the same one she'd displayed in her shop. Amelia had helped me reclaim it through legal notice. It had come back scratched, but intact. I ran my hand along its iron handle, feeling the groove I'd carved years ago. "Tangents creates beauty. Patience," I whispered, "and timing." In the morning, I stood before the mirror one last time, dressed in black. Simple, deliberate, sharp as ink. I held the burned invitation again, tracing its scorched corner. This time, I didn't see loss. I saw a signature. I repeated my line, the one that had become my heartbeat. They can erase my name, but not my fingerprints. Then I tucked the card into my portfolio and left for the museum. The setup took hours. Every table aligned, every spotlight adjusted until the silver edges of the cards gleamed like quiet armor. Each display carried a fragment of history. Design number 001 to 2005. Close commission. Design number 034, 2012. Apprentice project. Natalie R. Design number 072, 2025. The burned invitation. At the back of the hall, I hung a single banner. Blake Originals. Nothing truly handmade is ever lost. When I stepped back, the hall glowed. Not grand, but honest, like closure. That evening, I walked home through the drizzle. The city lights blurred, soft, and forgiving. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. Just unfinished. At home, I poured a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the rain streak down the glass. Somewhere downtown, Natalie would be receiving her invitation about now. The silver embossed card shining in her hands, her stomach tightening as she read the words, Blake Originals. Maybe she'd laugh. Maybe she'd call Ethan. Maybe she'd tear it up. It didn't matter. The moment she saw my handwriting, she'd know. I wasn't gone. I was preparing. The day of the exhibition arrived crisp and bright. The kind of morning that tricks you into thinking the world is kind. The Portland Museum of Design shimmered with light spilling through tall glass windows. Inside, the hall smelled of paper, ink, and nervous anticipation. My kind of perfume. People had started gathering before the official opening. Designers, journalists, former clients, art students clutching notebooks. The very crowd that used to praise her. They whispered as I walked past, their voices blending into a low hum. She's back? After everything online? Heard Natalie's coming, too. Yes, she was. I'd made sure of it. At 6 p.m., the lights dimmed. The hall filled with the kind of silence only truth can summon. I stepped onto the small stage at the center, wearing black silk gloves, not for glamour, but for symbolism. Hands that once built her career now dressed for burial. Behind me, the projector screen glowed with my logo. Blake Originals. Good evening, I began. Thank you for coming to celebrate 20 years of paper, patience, and persistence. My voice sounded steady, older but stronger. They say paper forgets, that it fades, tears, burns. But it doesn't. It remembers every pressure, every fingerprint. Tonight, I want to talk about what paper remembers and what people forget. Murmurs flickered across the audience, curiosity laced with caution. Edin said, and then I saw them. At the back of the room, Natalie and Ethan walking in hand, smiling as though they owned the air. They thought this was a reconciliation, maybe even a passing of the torch. Perfect. I gestured to the ushers. Please, make room for our guests of honor. The spotlight followed them as they approached, applause rising politely, rehearsed, hollow. Natalie looked radiant in a white suit, her confidence almost blinding. Ethan's grin was the same one he'd worn at the wedding. I smiled. How lovely of you both to join us. Of course, Natalie said smoothly. I wouldn't miss it. I'm so proud of you, Suho. The way she said, teacher, dripped with performance. And I of you, I replied, a voice soft. We've accomplished so much. But tonight, before we talk about love and legacy, I'd like to talk about something else. I turned to the audience. Truth. The word landed like a stone in a pond, rippling outward. The projector screen behind me changed. Slide 1, the contract. This silver line printing agreement. Gasps rustled through the crowd. This, I said, is the partnership agreement between Natalie Creations and Silverline Printing, filed last month. You'll notice the logo. It's identical to one registered in 2011 under my name, Eleanor Blake, with a federal trademark still valid until 2031. I clicked to the next slide. Emails. Messages from Natalie to suppliers, written under my old signature, sent from a forged address. And these, I continued. Our emails sent from an unauthorized domain imitating my studio, instructing suppliers to redirect clients. The IP address traces to the same location as her office. A murmur rippled. Not just curiosity now, but recognition. Ethan's face paled slightly. Natalie's smile froze. This is unnecessary, she began, forcing a laugh. We can discuss this privately. No, I said calmly. You made it public first. I'm just returning the courtesy. Slide 3, the social media post. Her Apprentice to Entrepreneur article. Slide 4, the original photos cropped to remove my presence. I was called her logistics assistant. That's one way to spell founder, I suppose. Laughter, small, sharp, involuntary, broke from the audience. Even journalists were taking notes now. Natalie's hand trembled. Ethan whispered something to her, jaw tight. You're humiliating yourself, he hissed. I met his eyes. No, Ethan. I'm liberating myself. I clicked to the final slide. On the screen appeared the burned wedding invitation, its corner charred, the silver foil catching the light. This, I said quietly, was the last card I ever designed under my old name. It was displayed at a wedding where I was called Mother of the Groom. A ripple of recognition. Some people had heard the gossip, others were putting pieces together. That night, I realized something. People can erase you from a card, from a company, from a story. But they can't erase what you made by hand. Phyllis, I turned to Natalie. You took my name off the invitation. But you forgot. The paper still remembers who folded it. The crowd fell utterly silent. I came to your wedding to bless your beginning, I continued, voice steady. But tonight, I'm attending the funeral of those who forgot gratitude. Ugh, gasps. Then, stillness. Natalie's breath came shallow. Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. You can sue me, I said, addressing the room, and maybe you will. But before you do, check the registry. Because as of 3 weeks ago, Blake Originals is legally mine. And the contracts, the templates, the signatures you used are all traceable. I kept every receipt. I kept everything you thought I wouldn't. I looked directly at Natalie. You wanted to inherit my craft. Congratulations. You've also inherited my lawyers. A low laugh spread through the room, nervous, admiring, alive. Ethan took a step forward, his voice low, controlled. You're destroying what's left of your reputation. No, I said. I'm restoring it. One burned edge at a time. I turned to the crowd. And now, before we continue with the exhibition, I'd like to thank those who made this lesson possible. Gestured toward them. Meet my best students. Proof that plagiarism can't kill patience, and betrayal can't erase craftsmanship. The audience laughed, soft at first, then louder, bolder. Someone started clapping, then another, and another, until the sound filled the hall like thunder breaking glass. Natalie's face drained of color. Well, Ethan tugged her arm. We're leaving, he muttered. They turned, walking through the crowd, a corridor of whispers following them out. Someone caught a photo, flash exploding across the hall. I didn't stop it. They'd built their story with images, they drown in one. When the doors finally closed behind them, the room held a strange, electric quiet. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked. And then, applause again, softer this time, but real. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. My hands trembled, not from fear, but release. Amelia appeared at the edge of the stage, her smile half shock, half pride. You realize, she said later, that was both a confession and a press conference. Good, I said. Then they'll print the truth for once. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, handshakes, and quiet tears. People came to me with stories of stolen work, forgotten credits, familiar wounds. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had been erased. The museum lights dimmed to a warm gold, reflecting off the framed invitations. I stood before the burned one. My favorite. A young journalist approached me, microphone trembling. Miss Blake, do you regret making this so public? I looked at the card, the dark edge curling like a petal. Regret? I said softly. No. You can't regret telling the truth. You can only regret waiting so long to say it. She nodded, eyes wide, and lowered the microphone. As the last guests drifted out, I stayed behind. The hall was quiet again, the kind of silence that feels earned. I walked to the stage, picked up the burned invitation, and held it under the light. The charred edge shimmered faintly, almost beautiful. "You survived," I whispered. "So did I." Behind me, Amelia turned off the projector. The screen went black, leaving only reflections of light on glass and silver. For the first time in years, the word Blake didn't sound borrowed. It sounded like mine. I left the hall, the echo of applause still following me down the empty corridor. Outside, the city lights glittered like confetti. I looked up at the night sky and smiled. "I came to bless a wedding," I murmured. But tonight, I buried the ungrateful. The wind lifted, cool against my face. Not the chill of loss, but the breath of freedom. That night, when the museum emptied and the applause had faded into the dark, I went home alone. The studio smelled faintly of dust and lavender, the way it always had before everything broke. On the table lay the last object I had carried from the exhibition, the burned invitation, its silver edges still glinting under the desk lamp. I sat down slowly, smoothing the paper between my fingers. The corner crackled, fragile but defiant. For a long time I just looked at it. The room was utterly silent. Even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. Icy. Then I began to fold. Each crease was deliberate, the motion slow, almost ceremonial. The same way I used to fold sample cards for clients who believed love could be preserved in paper. The burn mark formed a dark diagonal, like a signature. When I finished, I slipped it inside a glass frame. The reflection of the flame's scar met my own eyes. It just came. I didn't feel anger, only lightness. Thin, sharp, impossible to describe. Because sometimes betrayal isn't punishment. It's instruction. The universe doesn't whisper you've lost, it says, sign again. I placed the frame on the shelf above my desk, beside my first ever design. The one I'd made at 27, naive and fearless. The two cards looked at each other across decades. After one burned, told me that was balance. I poured a glass of water, not wine. The bitterness had already burned itself out. Outside, rain began again. Soft, cleansing, tapping on the window like fingers reminding me I was still here. I opened my notebook, the one labeled Seeds, and wrote the final entry. Blank. April 3rd event. Truth displayed publicly. Outcome freedom properly signed. Note: do not confuse peace with silence. Then I closed it and set the pen down for good measure. Messages started lighting up my phone. Articles, congratulations, even apologies from people who had once believed the rumors. One line from a stranger caught my eye. "You made me remember why I started creating. Thank you for fighting for the handmaid." I smiled. That was enough. Recognition not from those who owed it, but from those who understood it. At midnight, I stepped outside. The air smelled of wet pavement and new beginnings. Across the street, someone was closing a flower shop, turning off the lights one by one. I thought of Natalie. I didn't imagine revenge anymore. I imagined her someday holding a blank sheet of paper and finally realizing what it means to start from nothing. Maybe that would be punishment enough, to face the emptiness I once filled for her. Inside, the flower press waited in the corner. I ran my hand along the iron handle. It creaked softly, familiar, forgiving. "We made it," I whispered. I placed a new sheet inside, fresh, unprinted, smelling faintly of cotton. Clap. Pressed it down slowly. The hinge groaned, a low, contented sound. When I released it, the paper came out with a faint impression of the grooves, invisible to the eye, but tangible to the touch, like memory. Sitting by the window, I watched dawn edge its way into the room, gray light softening the outlines of everything. It struck the glass frame, catching the glint of the burned card. For a moment, it looked alive again, glowing as if the flame had never gone out, only changed color. And I realized I wasn't trying to rebuild my old life. I was building the space where the next one could begin. People will tell you, justice feels triumphant. It doesn't. It feels quiet. It feels like exhaling after holding your breath for years. I wasn't a victim anymore, or a martyr, or even a teacher. I was simply a woman who had made something with her hands and refused to let anyone steal the fingerprints from it. I lifted the framed invitation one last time and whispered, half laughing, "You burned well, didn't you?" The smoke was gone, but the story stayed. When the sun finally rose, I made tea, opened the windows, and let the cool air rush in. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to sound like the world turning its page. I closed my eyes and let the morning light settle on my face. "No more funerals," I said softly. "Only beginnings." That was how the night ended. Not with applause or anger, but with a single framed piece of paper glowing in the first light of day. Because sometimes the universe doesn't give you closure. It hands you a pen and says, "Sign again." A year can feel like an eternity when you're rebuilding from ash. But sometimes, eternity is exactly how long it takes to come home to yourself. 12 months after the exhibition, my world had changed its rhythm. The city still woke with its noise and traffic, but my mornings began in silence. A deliberate kind of peace. The studio had a new name on the glass door. Paper Revival Institute. Not a business, a classroom. A small, sunlit space where women sat at long tables scattered with ribbons, scissors, glue, and cups of tea. Most of them were in their 40s or 50s. Women who had raised children, run households, survived divorces or losses, and were now learning how to fold paper as if they were folding back time. We didn't just make cards. We made beginnings. On the front wall hung the burned wedding invitation. It was framed in clear glass now, both sides visible, the wound and the beauty. Below it, in silver lettering, the phrase I had engraved, "Burned once, signed twice." It was our unofficial motto. Each new student asked about it sooner or later. The story had traveled farther than I had ever planned. Articles, interviews, even a short documentary. They called me the woman who rewrote her name in fire. Oh, I didn't correct them. But in this room, I wasn't a headline. I was just Eleanor. That afternoon, the class was quiet except for the rustle of paper and the slow hiss of the heating vent. One of the women, Ruth, a retired nurse with hands that still trembled slightly from medication, looked up from her project. "Ms. Eleanor," she asked, "do you ever make wedding invitations anymore?" I smiled. The question came gently, without malice. "No," I said, "I only make farewell cards now, for the things that don't deserve to stay." The room laughed softly, the kind of laughter that understands pain. Ruth nodded, pressing her folding bone against the paper crease. "Then I'll make one for my fear," she said. "Perfect," I told her. "Just remember to sign it." After class, I stayed behind to tidy the tables. The scent of glue and tea mixed in the air, strangely comforting. Light from the west window struck the framed invitation, making its burned edge glow like amber. I touched the glass. It was cool, solid. A scar turned into a signature. When I first opened the institute, I worried that the story behind it would overshadow the work. But the women who came didn't want gossip. They wanted proof that loss could be repurposed. Each session ended the same way. We signed our names at the bottom of our projects, no matter how imperfect they were. I told them the truth I had learned the hardest way. Perfection isn't when nothing burns. It's when you still create after it does. Outside, life had moved on. Natalie's studio had quietly closed 6 months after the exhibition. The lawsuit she'd filed against me dissolved the moment Amelia released the public evidence. No countersuit. No apology either. Just silence. The most fitting confession of all. Sometimes, students asked if I hated her. I told them no. Hate takes energy. I prefer craft. If she ever walks by this studio, she'll see her reflection in the glass door beside mine. 2 faces separated by time. That's punishment enough. To be reminded of what she once held and threw away. Every Sunday, I host a free workshop called Resignature. Women bring objects from their past: burned letters, torn photos, documents signed by ex-husbands, eviction notices, and we turn them into art. Not to forget, but to reclaim. One woman framed her divorce decree between pressed daisies. Another stitched gold thread through a layoff letter until it looked like lace. When they leave, they always smile the same way I did after the exhibition. Quietly, as if breathing for the first time. One evening after the last student left, I stayed late to work on something personal. A new piece. A blank card of thick cotton paper, no embellishment. I wanted to see what simplicity looked like when it wasn't born from loss. I pressed a single line of text in the corner, handmade by survival. No name. Just that. Then I placed it inside the flower press and turned the handle. The metal groaned, that beautiful, familiar sound. When I lifted the lid, the paper carried faint marks, invisible unless you touched it. Like breath on skin. Later that night, Amelia stopped by with a bottle of cider. We sat by the window, the city lights reflected on the glass frame above us. "You built something real," she said. "No," I replied. "I just rebuilt myself. The rest followed." She laughed. "You ever think of retiring for real this time? From paper?" I smiled. "That would be like retiring from breathing." We drank quietly after that, the comfortable silence of old friends. When she left, I stood alone again in the studio, watching the reflection of the framed card in the window. Outside, the street lamps flickered in rhythm with my pulse. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being seen. There was nothing left for them to take. I'd already turned every loss into evidence of living. The next morning, a young woman knocked on the door. She looked nervous, clutching a portfolio to her chest. "Are you taking new students?" she asked. "Always," I said. She stepped inside, eyes scanning the wall until they landed on the burned invitation. "Only make that." "Yes." "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It looks alive." "That's because it is," I said. "Everything burned and still standing is alive." I handed her a pair of scissors. "Let's start with something small." She smiled. That same, tentative, hungry spark I'd once seen in another girl years ago. Only this time, I didn't feel fear, because now I knew what to do with beginnings. As the day wore on, the classroom filled again with laughter, the rustle of paper, the small, hopeful sounds of women making art from remnants. Sunlight streamed across the tables, warm and golden, glinting off the words etched on the wall. "Burned once. Signed twice." I watched them work, their hands steady, their faces soft with concentration, and realized something simple, almost sacred. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it folds quietly, edge to edge, one careful crease at a time. When the last student left, I locked the door and looked around the room. The tools, the frames, the scent of glue, everything exactly where it should be. For years, I built invitations to other people's futures. Now, for the first time, I was living mine. I sat by the window again, the same seat where my story had once unraveled. Only this time, there was no bitterness, no waiting. Just light. The glass frame glowed softly in the dusk. I traced the engraved words with my fingertip and whispered, "Burned once. Signed twice." Then I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd finished. The camera light blinked red, recording. It was just me, my desk, and the glass frame behind me. The burned invitation caught a line of sunlight, turning its blackened edge into gold. I looked straight into the lens. If one day you attend a wedding and realize your name has been erased from the invitation, don't cry. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Pick up a pen and sign again, in your own handwriting. Silence followed, the kind that fills a room like breath. Somewhere behind the camera, the old clock in my studio ticked once, soft and sure. I leaned forward a little. People often ask me if I regret exposing them. I don't, because the moment I told the truth, the weight left my hands. And that's all freedom really is. Empty palms ready to make again. I took a deep breath. This isn't just about me, or a name printed on paper. It's about anyone who's ever built something with their hands, their time, their love, and watched someone else claim it. I paused, choosing the words carefully. We're told to stay quiet, to be graceful, to let things go. But sometimes, grace looks like standing up in a crowded room and saying, "That was mine." The camera's focus light adjusted, catching the faint shimmer of the frame behind me. I used to think betrayal ruined me. Now I know. It remade me. It taught me that you can burn and still not disappear. I reached out and tapped the glass frame gently. See this? It was once an invitation to someone else's happiness. Now it's my certificate of survival. The air felt still, charged. So if you're watching this, and you've ever been erased, replaced, or rewritten, don't wait for permission to start again. Your story isn't over just because someone edited their version of it. I smiled. Small, honest. Make something. A card, a poem, a cup of tea. Anything that reminds you you're still here. Because creation is the opposite of erasure. For a moment, I said nothing, just listened to the faint hum of the city outside. Then I spoke the line I'd written and rewritten 100 times. Share this story. Not for me, but for someone who might need to hear that sometimes the truest invitation doesn't carry another person's name, it carries yours. The name you almost forgot, but never lost. I let the words hang in the air until they felt settled, like dust catching sunlight. Then I leaned closer, voice softer, as if speaking to one person instead of thousands. We spend our lives designing beginnings for others, weddings, birthdays, celebrations. But rarely do we design one for ourselves. Maybe it's time. I glanced down at the fountain pen on my desk, the same one I'd used to sign my new trademark. Its nib glinted under the light, a small blade of silver. "This is mine," I said, not because it's fancy, but because it's faithful. It remembers the shape of my name even when I forget. I took the pen, uncapped it, and wrote on a blank card in front of me. Just 2 words. For me. Then, I turned it toward the camera. If you don't know where to begin, start here. Your own invitation to freedom, to peace, to yourself. I placed the card beside the framed invitation, old and new, ashes and ink, side by side. Finally, I looked back at the camera and smiled. The kind of smile that belongs only to endings. My story closes here, I said. But who knows? Maybe it's the first signature of your own freedom. The red recording light blinked once more, then faded to black.